So we find that the ideal figure for a lot of even Christian theologians nowadays is becoming that of Sayyidina Musa, and the model for action is that of the Exodus. So, for instance, Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa writes, "I will want to show that the Christian Bible and the gospel of Jesus Christ is subversive of all injustice and evil, oppression and exploitation, and that he is the liberator God of the Exodus who leads his people out of every kind of bondage." It's a very new way for Christians to talk. And the Exodus theme characteristically seems conspicuous here rather than the cross. A discrete but important redistribution of stress, which in the case of the Latin American liberation theologians has led to some of the most serious tensions within the modern Catholic Church. I suspect that this is the birth pang of a really new possibility in Christianity, which has to render intriguing for Christians its very glorious anticipation in Islam. Because the Hijrah stands already precisely as an Exodus event. It's a sign of liberation, not only from the world, as in Rumi, but from the tyrants who abuse it. Of course, one of the communist Muslim claims about the Bible is that it predicts a new Moses. So we read in Deuteronomy, "I will raise up for them a prophet from among their brethren like unto thee, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he will speak unto them all that I shall command him." It's a new Exodus prophet who is foretold, who will bear a literally inspired scripture. It's one of the clearest foretellings of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam in the Hebrew Bible. So, our Exodus event is something that can now be taken very seriously by religious minds in the West in a way that hitherto it certainly wasn't. Our Exodus event is not an illusory, profane liberation, as some Christian critics have described the Hijrah. Like the earlier Exodus, our Exodus event leads not just out into the desert, but to Jerusalem. It leads on to Jerusalem and the construction of a place of God's glory. Many of you, if you saw CNN this morning, will have seen that place of God's glory and the suffering to which it's now being subject. Now, the Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock, really can be seen as the third temple. Blue and gold, splendid edifices offering to the former religions of Jerusalem something of the heavenly blessings that were brought down by the Mi'raj. And that building stood at the middle of a brand new third empire. Those buildings all have a particular deliberate rhetoric, and that's one of the points they're making. It was even made explicit by Mehmed the Conqueror when in 1453 he conquered Constantinople and actually claimed the mantle of the Byzantine rulers. But the Third Empire, in this sense, in my sense, was Mosaic, because it acknowledged the possibility of sacred kingship and sacred sexuality, which the Byzantines couldn't manage. So you could say that it represents the finest dimensions of the Hebrew Bible. And this is why we are not anti-Semitic in the sense that Christianity traditionally is anti-Semitic. We have quarrels with Judaism, of course, as we have quarrels with other religions. We regard them as abrogated. However, we're not anti-Semitic in the traditional Western sense. Why? Because Islam is actually, in a sense, the glorious triumph of that story. The story of Hebrew monotheism, the martial prowess of the Hebrew Bible, the tender sexuality of the Hebrew Bible. We continue those things. Under St. Paul and Paul's Christianity, which claims to consummate Judaism by simply negating it, by saying it was rubbish, an anti-religion established in order to throw into sharper relief the true religion of Christ, Islam's overtaking of the Hebrew message is also its universalization. Now, the Third Empire that the Sahaba created forms the subject of a remarkable meditation by the Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen. He wasn't explicitly referring to Islam, but in the context of what I'm saying here, which is about how the Western mind is moving towards a model of human perfection that we can fill with our founder, it's a very extraordinary anticipation. Ibsen wrote a play called Emperor and Galilean. He personally considered it to be his masterpiece. And here he wrestles with the commonplace 19th century problem of how to replace Christianity with a faith that would acknowledge the flesh and the need to challenge social iniquity. And the play is about a Roman emperor called Julian the Apostate, who seeks to return the world to the harmony between body and spirit, which he thought prevailed before Christianity had come along and declared war between the two. His view is that the Roman gods are actually open-minded and cultivated. They valued heroism, manhood, and willpower. The sweet lust of the flesh is celebrated by painted dancing girls and every kind of Bacchic mystery. That was the first empire. The second empire, inaugurated by Constantine and Helena, was an austere inversion of that, a world of denial, as he says, lived on the pillar where the saint awaits eternity on one leg. The heroes of the Second Empire, in fact, as Julian realizes, are not these bloodless, unpleasant, celibate ascetics, but in fact the pagans who are being slaughtered for Christ, their blood rising to him like a sweet incense. So Julian, the Roman emperor, who goes back on Christianity, back to paganism, is shown in Ibsen's play as being morally and spiritually acute. What he does is to reinstate the old pagan cults and seeks a universal reconciliation. However, Ibsen, a man who himself had flirted with Wagnerian dreams of self-realization through some kind of aversion to pagan identities, makes it clear that Julian's attempt to recreate the First Empire is doomed. The emperor finally concedes the old beauty is no longer beautiful, but the new truth is no longer true. And he becomes a pedant tyrant, deluded by his own sense of destiny, and he goes in battle with Persians in a very dramatic scene at the end of the play, a titanic battle which he actually loses. And his heart almost breaks as he realizes that neither Christianity nor paganism have worked. And he confesses this to Maximus, who's his pagan soothsayer. The dialogue runs as follows. "Tell me, who shall conquer, the emperor or the Galilean?" Maximus replies, "Both the emperor and the Galilean shall succumb, whether in our time or in hundreds of years I know not, but so it shall be when the right man comes. O fool, who have drawn up sword against that which is to be, against the third empire, in which the twin-natured shall reign." Julian says, the third empire, the Messiah, not the Jews' Messiah, but the Messiah of the two empires, the spirit and the world. And Maximus says, logos in pan and pan in logos. Now Julian realizes that he can't be that man. He's not going to be the founder of the new empire that reconciles the flesh and warriorhood and the sacred. He's been vanquished by his own delusions. He is what Ibsen calls an idealist, whereas what the world awaits, a liberative figure who is hopefully to come, is a realist. This opposition between idealism and realism doesn't have anything to do with a very technical, philosophical tussle that uses the same terms. What Ibsen means is something actually quite simple, tension between purely moral strategies. And Bernard Shaw, in his study of Ibsen, notes that according to the idealist, realism means egotism,